Welcome to our discussion about design thinking for social enterprise. We have a distinguished and accomplished panel to discuss this topic. Joining us today is John Kearns and Stefano Messori, both from Dublin, Ireland. John and Stefano are key members of the RISE program in Ireland, which is an excellent program at developing social entrepreneurs. Also joining us is Professor Richard Bilodeau from Portland, Maine. Richard is a friend and colleague from the University of Southern Maine with expertise in entrepreneurship and design thinking. My name is Gary Palin. I'm currently an entrepreneurship professor at the University of Southern Maine. My experience covers well over 3 decades developing curriculum and pedagogies in entrepreneurship utilizing transformational learning theory. My focus has been in high-growth entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial thinking. I'm a serial entrepreneur, having been involved in some capacity with the launch and growth of a number of ventures. It has been my privilege and honor to have spoken across the globe at numerous universities and conferences. I've been active in social entrepreneurship for over 20 years and have organized a number of social entrepreneurship workshops in the United States and Europe.
Yeah, I'm John Kearns. I'm the CEO of a social enterprise in Ireland called Partas. We are an enterprise development organization. We work in disadvantaged areas, helping people start their own businesses, start social enterprises, and all forms of minority entrepreneurship, largely. I also work with the Irish government in developing policy on social enterprise, and I sit on the expert advisory group to the European Commission.
My name is Stefano, and I've been in Ireland for the last 12 years, and I know John for the last 10 years. So let's say that he saw me growing in these 10 years. I mean, I'm originally from Modena, Italy, known for balsamic vinegar and Ferrari, Pavarotti, and other very good excellence we have down there. And when I came to Ireland, I didn't have a clue what my future would have been. I had a degree in marketing. I eventually decided to take an honors degree in Ireland in entrepreneurship. And at the same time, I got involved with the University of Virginia with Professor Jean Litka on design. So in few words, I'm matching both the strategic point of view and the design point of view and try to bring them together to create new value proposition that also have an impact in society.
I'm Richard Bilodeau. I'm coming to you today from Portland, Maine, where it's a balmy 44 degrees outside, Fahrenheit, so not Celsius. I teach in the School of Business at the University of Southern Maine, where I have expertise in the areas of entrepreneurship, business sustainability, and creativity in its use in business. And occasionally I teach courses in marketing and strategy as well. I'm particularly interested in the role that our neurochemistry plays in creative decision-making. And this is one of my favorite areas of research, particularly looking at how our stress response inhibits creative thought and the cognitive resets that people need or should be engaging in before they're going out to do any types of activities related to trying to resolve problems or ideate to find good solutions. I also teach our design thinking course, and like Stefano, I really love the design thinking process. You know, so many businesses end up failing because they create something that's totally just focused on the product that they want to sell and not focused on the people who might use the product that they have to sell. So design thinking is a wonderful opportunity to really get us in the human-centered designed mindset and really focus on all those early stages where we engage the marketplace and potential customers to figure out what their needs really are. In addition to teaching, I'm an entrepreneur myself. I own 2 growing businesses, one here in Maine that does consulting for others in alternative health, and we have partners all around the United States and Europe, and a second in Florida where we develop vacation information for people when they're visiting markets in the Southeast, and we deliver that via a TV network in hotels. I also have a fairly active consulting practice. I also am a big fan, and this is part of what we're going to talk about today, in the principle of enlightened self-interest, that you can do well by doing good. There's so much good research now to indicate that businesses that think about social and environmental responsibility and balance it with financial responsibility end up being more profitable in the long run. And so I think if you bring the right frame to the conversation and you're thinking about what businesses should do, you can end up doing something good in the world while also making a lot of money. So I'm very excited to be joining this group today to talk more about both design thinking and social enterprise.
John, would you provide background information about the RISE program, please?
The RISE program is part of it. I suppose in Partas, it tends to be an evolution in your thinking, just as there is in the world of social enterprise, as there is in the world of business entrepreneurship. We take the learning and then we build on that and we move on. And some years ago, we became involved in a European project on design thinking as could be applied to the provision of public services, so service design for public administration. And that was my introduction to the world of design. I was a little bit reluctant at the beginning. I kind of thought I'd be more cerebral than hands-on. And as we were building Lego prototypes and plasticine things, I kind of thought, this is ridiculous. Except that I found that I found that it actually worked. So anyway, yes, I became enamored with design because it worked. It might have seemed almost simplistic to me. And I also come from the old-fashioned days. My background is entirely commercial and sales driven. And in the old days of sales, when we actually taught sales as a skill, one of the early stages is doing the needs analysis. And I found that there was a tremendous correlation between the sales processes of needs analysis with the process of design thinking. That you understand the problem first and you don't jump in with a preset solution. You actually design the solution based on the problem. And that was the way sales was done in the old days. And what I liked about design is it took that logical approach as well. So from service design, we've been involved in various other projects with social enterprise. And we kind of thought, actually, we should combine design thinking with social enterprise. There's a human-centeredness about design thinking, which I think will work very, very well. I wasn't aware of anyone else who had done it. Of course, then I had known Stefano and his interest in this area. So we put the whole lot together. We developed a European program with partners in various European countries to look at how design might interplay with social enterprises, and particularly with looking at what went wrong in social enterprise. And from that program, then we developed this training program using design principles, design thinking as the basis for both initiation and scaling up of social enterprises. So we had we started the first week and then lockdown arrived. We had to rapidly reassemble online. And since then, we have got a fantastic group who are all of a very high caliber and being introduced to design for the first time. And that's very rewarding because, yes, they're finding it challenging, but they're finding it intriguing as well and a new skill. And they're excited about applying this to their lives or to their professional lives. So that's the RISE program. And we will continue to roll that out.
Richard, would you mind providing an overview of design thinking?
So I'm going to start with a brief story. Years ago in my consulting practice, I did some volunteer work at the Center for Entrepreneurship here in Maine. And one day, the woman who directed the center came to me and said, I need you to meet with this new client. He's developed a product and he spent his life savings on the product and he's brought it to the market and no one's buying. So he's got to figure out what to do next. So I said, sure. She brings the person into my office where he opens a suitcase and proceeds to take out a bunch of ties that he has painted clowns on. And after I got through my scary initial reaction, thinking, what's up with this guy and his box full of clown ties? I said, this isn't the product you're trying to bring to market, is it? And he said, absolutely. Why do you ask? And my next question was, did you talk to anyone first to see if they wanted a tie with a clown painted on it? Now, obviously, had he gone out and done some market research, he probably would have learned that he was ahead of his time. Stephen King hadn't published the novel It yet. And no one knew who Pennywise was, and no one really wanted a nice tie with a scary clown painted on it. But to me, it's fascinating the number of entrepreneurs who start with the product and have the build it and they will come attitude. So we come up with what we think is a good idea. We talk ourselves into it. We romanticize it. We convince ourselves it's the greatest thing ever. We invest a lot of money and time into the creation of it. And then we get to market only to find out that we're the only one who really loves it. And so in the United States, about 70% of small businesses fail within 5 years. And this is largely driven by the fact that they're creating products that are not delivering value to the marketplace. So one of the reasons I love design thinking is it breaks that relationship that we have with falling in love with our own ideas and our own products and gets us really focused in the concepts of human-centered design or customer-centric design, going back and talking to people first to get an understanding of what their needs, wants, and demands are, and mapping that to the things that we might bring to market. So in design thinking, I like the classic 5-step model where you start with empathy. You've got to understand what the audience wants, your prospects, your customers. If you're creating a new product or you're trying to develop a product line extension, extend your brand in some way, you go out and you talk to people. And there are 3 tools there that I find very useful. One is the empathy map, which either gets you to talk to your customers and prospects or gets you to play the part of them and to discuss what people think, say, do, see, feel about the thing that you're selling. So you use the emotions as a way to find connection around what people's needs and wants are. And the empathy map allows us to get to the point of pain and the point of gain. Why is someone going to go out to the market and seek a product like this? And if they buy it, what benefit are they going to get? I also like the customer journey map, which allows you to think about how a customer interacts with your product from start to finish, from the moment that they first learn about it, all the way through the decision-making process to acquisition, to use, and disposal. So it really allows you to think about how you are engaging customers and what value you're delivering to them. And then lastly, I like to develop customer profiles and personas. So using the sort of classic customer profile development techniques where you might try to learn about demographics, psychographics, behaviors, and geographics, but then couple that with personas. You know, is your audience largely made up of people who watch tennis or watch NASCAR? You know, if you're going to create a new wine product that you want to bring to market and the average selling price of the bottle of wine is $50, then when you start to think about the persona of the person who can afford a $50 bottle of wine, those people probably shop at higher end department stores like Macy's more than they shop at a place like Walmart. So personas are great because they allow us to start to think about how we could put our customers together, but develop sort of an understanding about what's unique about them, which may help inform our thinking about product and marketing strategy. After empathy, we go to problem definition. And one of the things that's interesting about problem definition in class, I love to show this slide. It's got these 2 guys, they're standing in an alleyway and they're exchanging something and they look like shady characters. One of them's got all these piercings in one ear and tattoos, and they look like they're doing something and they're trying to block it from your view. And I say to the class, what's the problem? And as you can imagine, 99% of the class goes, oh, those guys are doing a drug deal. Well, it turns out it's a picture of someone scalping a concert ticket to someone else. So often we think we know what the problem is, but until we go through the steps of clearly defining it, we don't actually know. And so there are lots of ways in which we can drill down on a problem. One of my favorite techniques is called a concept map, where you might take an issue like climate change, you put it in the center, and then you think about all the problems associated with climate change, then all the problems associated with that. And you use this mapping as a way to get much clearer around the problem. After that, you go to ideation. And this is where you have to make sure you've engaged your creative mind. You know, one of the things that's fascinating to me about ideation, so many of my students and folks in my consulting practice think ideation is the process that begins with trying to think really hard about the best idea. That's not it at all. In ideation, we really value quantity over quality when we begin the journey. So we want to come up with as many ideas as possible, and we don't want to prejudge any of them. Later on, we'll develop screening criteria to help us identify the best of the ideas, but we really want to make sure we don't shut down any possibility in ideation. Now, the good news is we're going to go back to the audience, because this is human-centered design, and talk to them again. So after we've done our brainstorming, we've come up with ideas, and we've put some screening tools in place to choose what we think will be the best, then we're going to develop a prototype. And again, a lot of people think a prototype is something that has to be engineered. Not necessarily. A business model, like the business model canvas, could be a prototype of how a business works. You could sketch it. You could draw it. You could use a computer program to illustrate it. You could use Legos to build an example. You could create a skit where you could act out how people are going to interact with the product. The point of a prototype is it just gives us a way to get feedback from users. So it allows them to visualize what we actually are hoping to deliver to them in the marketplace so that we can get good feedback. And so prototypes can be as sophisticated as we want them to be, but what I like to say to people is you should develop the prototype that's going to give you the best feedback for the least amount of investment in your money and your time. And then you go out and do testing. So the final stage is about getting that feedback. So you have to have a test plan, you have to go out, you have to talk to your users, you get that feedback, and you've got to recognize that this is an iterative process. You may find out that the prototype wasn't a good way to represent the thing you're selling. So you might have to go back to prototyping before you retest. Or you might find out your idea was not that great. No one in the marketplace is interested. So in that case, you might go all the way back to the starting step of empathy and do your work again. But when you're using design thinking and you're really focusing on what potential customers want, it greatly increases the likelihood that you're going to deliver something of value to the marketplace.
Well, at this point, I thought we would just turn it to an open forum with what questions John and Stefano have of Richard and I.
Yeah, if I were in your class, Richard, I'm the kind of guy you're going to hate, because I will immediately think of the weirdest question possible, the most contrary question. And I suppose, as I was listening to you there, and I absolutely get all of that, and I think it's great. However, there are the exceptions, and I'm kind of thinking of the people who might listen to this, and as they're sitting there, they say, yeah, but actually, what about, the forward thing about fast car or faster horses and things like this? Surely there are times when it is appropriate to just be instinctive and go with your gut and have that light bulb moment. Can you then bypass the entire design process?
I would say there are certainly cases where that works. But if you look at companies who thought they would do that, like Uber and Tesla, they're doing a great marketing job. They're not necessarily doing a great job with their light bulb ideas. And, I think one of the interesting things, the world is a lot more complex than when we invented the light bulb and the first Model T Ford. So I do think there's a place for innovation where if you're the person who comes up with a truly unique idea, then you can probably skip some of the design thinking steps because you're the first person to come up with an idea. But the reality in the United States is about 98% of businesses that launch in a year, they think they have a new idea. They're really just doing something that someone else has already done before. So certainly when I think about innovation management, if you're one of the lucky 1% to 2% that really has a novel idea, then some of this might be unnecessary. If you're in the vast majority, you're going to enter an already crowded marketplace. And, one of the things I love when I teach strategy is, when you talk about the work that Michael Porter developed with the original 3 strategies and ways in which companies compete based on low cost, differentiation, or focus or niche, I mean, those are all nice buckets to be in. But for most entrepreneurs, they probably end up following, unfortunately, one of the strategies that Porter discussed later on, the middle of the road strategy. Because they're like, I can't be the lowest cost and I don't want to be the highest cost. I can't have the highest product quality and I don't want the lowest. The problem is when you're in the middle of the road, you're not distinguishing yourself from anyone else who's in the middle of the road. So if you're in what I like to call the middle and the majority, your likelihood of failure is great. And so, one of the things that's funny to me, one of my areas of research is around why businesses fail. And so I've conducted about 400 forensic interviews now with businesses around New England who have failed. Interestingly, most of them start by believing they've come up with a unique idea. And by the time they failed, what they've realized is the marketplace was already really crowded. So, I think at the core of your question, if you really are developing something that is truly unique and new, sure, I think you can jump ahead. But even if you look at disruptors like Uber or Tesla and what they're attempting to do, they've learned by being in the marketplace, there are lots of things they did not anticipate about consumer behavior that they wish they would have known in advance. And so, on the flip side, Apple's also done a great job at disrupting the marketplace many times, but I would argue that they spent decades doing it and building that brand. And one of the things that Apple has learned in the last 10 years is if they go out and talk to the marketplace first, and they sort of use that sense model where we sense what the marketplace needs and use that as a source of innovation, that we're able often to get products more quickly positioned in the market for success. So we don't have these 10 and 15-year learning curves. We're able to really shorten the amount of time it takes for adoption.
It's interesting you mentioned Apple because I was thinking of Steve Jobs. He might be one of the few examples of someone intuitively that understood the market, but there were not many of us are Steve Jobs. And I've seen so many companies that will come up with an interesting idea, but then they fail with the execution, which is a critical component. But they're also not reaching out to the market until after they've developed the business plan or ties with clowns on it. Going way back, we used to teach very much on the business planning model. And you would see both in classrooms and in applications, you would have the team sit and write their business plan, spending weeks fine-tuning this beautiful business plan. And there's an old saying is the business plan never survived first contact with the customer.
Yeah, just another thought. The world of design, I think, is well proven in terms of the business world. And just your thoughts on taking that model and transferring it into the world of social enterprise. Are there any differences? And I kind of say that on the basis that I think in many cases the entrepreneurs are different, the social entrepreneur from the commercial entrepreneur, in that most social entrepreneurs that I've met never considered themselves as social entrepreneurs. They tended to trip across a situation that demanded their response to do something about it, because nobody else was sorting this out. And they did it instinctively again. So now we have evolved to a situation where there's a kind of a more developed approach in the world of social enterprise. So do all the kind of the guidelines and all the steps of the model in design thinking apply equally to social enterprise, or are there adaptations, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think a couple of things. First, one of my observations about social entrepreneurs is most of them are very clear about the persona of themselves. And if they're not, I encourage them to do that. Like, they need to know what their own value systems and beliefs are. And one of the things that I've seen is a trend in my research is most of them already know what those things are. They can answer those questions. And, they don't necessarily, like in the corporate strategy model, have to spend a lot of time sitting around and cooking up a vision, a mission, and a value statement. They already sort of inherently know those things, and I think that's helpful. The other thing that I find when I introduce the process of design thinking to social entrepreneurs is they go, oh, well, I can skip the empathy step because I already know that this is going to be a great idea. And so in my consulting practice, if I interview someone, in many cases that's true because they've already talked to dozens, if not hundreds of people about their idea. So many social entrepreneurs I know are connectors and networkers. They're already out there talking to people and gathering intel. They don't realize that they're already doing the empathy stage and the problem definition stage, but that's what they are in fact doing. And often the genesis of the idea comes from the fact that they get really irate about something that's unjust, but they learn about that thing that's unjust through that community-based networking. And then as they think about solving the problem, they also talk to people about solving the problem. So in some ways, I have encountered in my own experience and my own research, very few social entrepreneurs who got out of bed one day and said, all right, today I'm going to address world hunger. Most of them I've encountered are like, I could fix this hunger problem by fixing this food growth problem, by making this accelerator for soil. And I know it's going to work because I talked to my friend the farmer and my friend the biologist, and I talked to my 3 neighbors about it. Well, you're already so much further ahead than people that just start and fall in love with their idea. And so, I would say if I were thinking about the persona of social entrepreneurs, most of the ones that I have encountered are already talkers. I mean, they're pitching their idea. So they're very entrepreneurial in that way. And I think as a result of pitching that idea, they're able to get some of that feedback. Now, I still encourage people to basically go through the steps of design thinking. And here's my whole pitch around human-centered design. It helps us determine if things are desirable, if they're feasible, and if they're viable. So before you decide to do anything, you got to know people are going to want it. You have to know you can make money doing it. And you have to make sure you can actually do it. And so, if that's the simple frame that you use in terms of design thinking, then that's an okay frame because it answers a lot of the base questions that need to be answered. And so, I find often what a pleasure is in working with social entrepreneurs is they've already done a lot of good thinking. They're not like the guy that showed up in my office with the tie and said, one day I was bored, so I went to my basement and I painted a bunch of ties in absolute isolation and fell in love with these bizarre clowns. They're people who they're actually concerned about doing some social good. And then all of a sudden it dawned on them they could make some money at the same time. Or they've thought about the money piece and then they figure out the social good, but they've learned about that not just through thinking about it themselves, but through talking to others.
Yeah, that's a fascinating insight, actually.
Yeah, I'd like to tie a few other issues with that also, because I concur 100% with Richard. And one of the issues you were asking is it similar type of techniques from social entrepreneurship with entrepreneurship? And I would say it's the concepts are virtually the same. The distinction might be the passion. And that's a word that gets bandied about very often in entrepreneurship, but I believe it. Because if you're not pursuing your passion, usually people that are pursuing money, trying to become wealthy, it's too damn hard, and they give up before they get there. They have to love what they're doing. So the passion just has to be in a different direction. What a difference though with social enterprise, with a traditional entrepreneurial venture, there's an additional market involved, which is the social impact market. So that adds another degree of which you have to analyze. And I'm not sure what it's like in Ireland, John and Stefano, but I talk to our students to be very careful not to assume what you think the social impact needs, to go talk to people with the social impact. There's an expression that we use in the US. It's, I'm here from the government and I'm here to help you. And you immediately say, I'm running out the back door.
Yeah.
Well, you don't want to go to the social impact marketplace or venue and say, I'm here, I know what you need, I'm here to help you. So I think that's what this design thinking component is critical from that application. They could actually be doing a disservice to the market versus a service if they don't truly understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think probably one of the ways in which there has been a globalization in the world of social enterprise is that we are pretty much talking about and dealing with the same issues. Impact is kind of really the hot area at the moment. We've got to know that we're having an impact, and we've got to be able to prove we're having an impact. And yeah, any kind of processes like this are going to ensure that we're not going to be found wanting in that area.
Great.
Stefano, have you a difficult
technical
question?
Many. But I suppose my question comes more from, rather than the concept or the usability of design, to the practice of design. And the question is, obviously, when you explain the models to them, say, oh, actually, Stefano, do you have real case studies of social entrepreneurs? Forget about Uber, Google, Apple. And every time that I get a little bit too academic, they kind of switch off. And when I make a real case example of an entrepreneur that I know, all of a sudden the participation goes up because they feel, oh, actually, there is something that resonates with me. So I'm asking you, do you have real case studies that can be shared, from your students or something that you are familiar, that somebody's writing a book about it, not big companies, but really people that are trying to make the difference and are using these tools to make it happen?
I mean, I think, one of the examples I share in class is an organization called Save the Food, which is trying to address the amount of food waste in America. And, Save the Food, they did some research, and one of the things they discovered, the average American throws away about 300 pounds of food a year. And so they were convinced that if they just built awareness campaigns and made people aware of the fact that we were so wasteful, that this would change behavior. So they picked some DMAs, small, mid, and large. New York City was their big, large market test. And they invested in these beautiful advertising campaigns that A, most people just walked right by. And B, even the people, when they subsequently did research with the marketplace who stopped and read it, what do you think most people's reaction was? Well, that's probably true of me, but what do I do about it? And so, they developed this whole funded enterprise where people gave them money to build an awareness campaign because they thought that would be the social good. Now, one of the things that I've done as an exercise in my class, we take that concept and we reinvent that business using design thinking. So we go back to empathy and we say, okay, we've identified what we think is a problem, which Americans waste a lot of food. Now let's really get into why that is and define the problem. A lot of what my classes have found in the 3 semesters I've done this, that's been fascinating to me, is that it's not a lack of awareness. People already know they're wasteful. But in many cases, it's an education. Most people, millennials and Gen Z, don't know how to cook because no one taught them how to cook. So they eat something once and then they don't know what to do with the rest of it. So when you start to think about issues related to portion control, the fact that we supersize everything in America. So when we go and we do that concept map, it turns out we've identified in 3 classes 19 different customer issues that need to be addressed to solve food waste. So whenever a social entrepreneur says to me, oh, it's so obvious what the answer should be, I say, sure, on the surface it seems obvious, but you got to really drill down to make sure you know all the things that created that problem. And so Save the Food ends up being an interesting one for me. There's a local law firm that I've been working with that's been dealing with gender bias in pay in the workplace. And I have coached them through the design thinking process in terms of developing a new employee compensation program. So this has been fascinating, going out and, one of the things the woman in charge of this program said to me, which I thought was so interesting, going out and actually talking to men and women and getting them to do an empathy map with me about how they think about their compensation was one of the most eye-opening experiences I've had in my 3-decade career. She's like, I've been in HR a really long time. If you would have asked me what people think about what they get paid, here are the things I would have said. Of the things I would have said, of the 10 words I would have used to describe them, almost no one used these 10 words. Almost no one had these same feelings or these same issues. And in fact, we had drafted what we were going to propose for this equity and pay compensation program. We dropped the draft in the paper shredder after going out and talking to our employees and getting their perspective. And we've arguably built something that we think is better. So, I think anecdotally and through course experience and through some limited experiences in my consulting practice, I think the same process absolutely applies. Again, there are going to be, just in any enterprise, there may be certain stages where you already have more awareness than you think you have, or you already have enough customer contact and insight to be able to do an empathy map. One of the things that I'll often say to businesses and students, you can do an empathy map one of 2 ways. You can do it with your prospects or customers, or you can put yourself in the mind of the prospect and customer. Often, for us to take the temperature of how good we know our customers, I'll say, why don't you start by putting yourself in the role of the customer and do an empathy map? And then why don't you go out and conduct some where your customers lead you through the process, and then look at the gap, because that's going to tell you what you don't know. And the gap might be something that's important to focus on. So, I think, I agree. It's interesting that the field, is still developing. I've heard recently, I took a course at MIT in the use of artificial intelligence and business strategy, 7-week course. It was a bit of a nightmare, but I got through it. And the thing that I thought was interesting, we had a whole module where we talked about design thinking for artificial intelligence. And this engineer tried to convince the class that it was a totally different process, and went through, added a few steps and augmented some of the steps. And at the end of the day, I'm like, you're still trying to know what your customers want. You're still trying to clearly define the problem. You're still trying to come up with lots of good ideas before you screen them. You still need to get feedback, and you still need to do testing. So it's no different. At its core, it's the same process. You've just decided to add some language to make it seem more applied to AI, and I understand that. I did not start my career in business. I actually am a chemist by training. And, I worked in hospital laboratories, and I used to love how, the clinical chemist would have fights with the organic chemist. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. It's all just chemistry. We're all just talking about molecules and how we access certain molecules. You have a different naming convention than me, but at its core, we do the same thing. I often find, particularly as some of these schools of thought evolve, that people do develop their own flavor of them, so to speak. But I think at the core, they're largely accomplishing the same stuff.
Yeah, I'd like to touch on your question also, Stefano. There's 2 points. One is I don't know of a source of examples. Everything that I know is anecdotal. But there's 2 interesting ones. One was student-driven and the other was not student-driven, that addressed education in sub-Saharan Africa. And the reason I believe it's important to go through empathy mapping is, while you might be interested in the quality of education, or the individuals are not able to get access to education in sub-Saharan Africa, empathy mapping helps you define more of a niche component or specific needs involved. So both of these projects addressed education, but they took 2 different approaches based on the niche and the needs. When they got closer to the market, they saw voids. One was a company called Tutu Desk that found that a majority of young people didn't have a simple school desk to learn to write on. And they partnered with Bishop Desmond Tutu and created a lap desk so that the students would have a hard substance to write on, versus turning the chair, getting on their knees and writing on the chair, or trying to write on the dirt floor. So then another one was interesting. It was a student from University of Bath that went on a student trip to Ghana and was shocked at how little supplies the students had to use. They didn't even have pens and pencils and paper. So he created a company called Elephant Branded, getting discarded cement bags and making these cool backpacks and other products from this, creating an online venture, which is widely successful, and he's able to provide supplies for the students in these schools. So the empathy mapping, while they both were interested in the same topic, understanding and getting closer to the market, they both came up with a viable venture, social enterprise, to solve a specific problem.
Yeah, no, that is very interesting, Gary, because the only example that I can put together as an educator are of people leaving the first world, either US or Europe, that when you take them outside of their native environment, all of a sudden they become creative. Why? Because the environment changes. Now, how do we get them creative in the environment in where they were born, where we have problems, but it seems that their creativity is being killed by the system?
Regarding the homeless, I saw a project in the UK, I forget where it was, dealing with the homeless and hunger. And they created a soup kitchen, but the people that were employed by the soup kitchen were the homeless. So they trained them to run the facility. So it was a self-contained issue, which was interesting. I don't know what the story, if they survived, but it's an interesting concept. And it goes into addressing a more narrow area within the project. There's an old expression, the best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. So trying to attack the entirety is very difficult. So, and you talk about the creativity of taking someone out of their environment. And how do you get them to be creative? I know Richard will validate that my students become creative because they have no other choice. And that's where the transformational learning theory takes place, because I put them in a disorienting dilemma with total ambiguity, very little direction and information, and I give them a end goal. And that's the first stage. The second stage is they have to work through the process. And that's where the creativity is stimulated, because I'm not giving them the answers. And then at the end, once they've come up with their projects and their solutions, whatever the end goal is, then the third stage is we'll reflect on what they did, and that's where deep learning takes place. Richard?
And I'm a big fan of changing the way in which we think about the role creativity plays in education. I mean, I'm fortunate enough that I teach a course in the program that Gary and I designed that is a course in creativity and business. And so in my classroom, it is not uncommon for us to be meditating, chanting, doing Qigong, coloring, playing with Legos, engaging our creative minds, because what we know about neurochemistry most of us make decisions in a very stressed out state. And our bodies don't recognize the difference between survival stress and daily stress. And so, unfortunately, our stress response taps down our ability to be creative. You know, I spent the summer doing fellowships in a couple places in Montreal, just focused on looking at the role that neurochemistry plays in overall business success. And so, you know, one of the things that I also think is funny, there's a famous study in Australia where they went out and they looked at CEOs and the environments in which they make decisions. And it turns out the people that had to make these really business altering decisions, if instead of just acting on impulse, they went out and they played a game of basketball, or they played a game, or they doodled, or they daydreamed before, ended up making better decisions. So, I mean, I think creativity, I like Gary's approach, and I also use it where I give them no choice but to be creative, but I'm also very intentional about creativity. So before we start ideating, I make sure we do something to give ourselves a cognitive reset so that we do our best thinking. And, you know, I have students now that years later, you know, we were voting in a midterm vote in the state of Maine in February, and I was standing in line waiting to vote, and this person came up to me and reeked of marijuana. And I thought, oh, there's this pothead behind me. And then this person tapped me on the shoulder and went, oh, Professor Bilodeau. He's a former student. You know, he's created this lab where he's now able to do this high yield production of removing the active components from marijuana, which is why he reeked of it. And he's providing them to pharmaceutical companies, and he's providing them to supplement companies. And all of a sudden, this kid is like, everything you told me about business models was true, and everything you told me about being creative was true. For 3 years, I struggled trying to find a way to break into this marketplace, and now I'm making $250,000 a year. I have 4 employees. Like, so to me, I think some of it is just the intention of getting people in the process. But I also want to talk a little bit about service learning. So one of the things that's interesting, I teach a course where students have to go out and do something good in the community. And so last semester, I had students that wanted to work with the homeless. The first thing I made them do was go out and hang out in the spots in Portland where the homeless hang out. Meet the people, learn about what their challenges are. Now, the interesting thing, as part of that discussion, here's what you're going to do. People were saying, you know, I don't understand why people don't feel like they have adequate this, that, or the other thing. Clothing is an example. Because there's all these people that donate all this clothing, and there are all these places where you can get clothes. I'm like, okay, but that is based on the assumption that you want to go to those places to get the clothes. So why don't you go out and talk to people to see what's going on? So the students came back, and this I thought was delightful. They had 3 observations from spending time out in dealing with the vulnerable population. The first was they didn't need as many clothes as we thought they needed. So they came up with 2 ideas. They needed better things to sleep in. So they engaged a local designer to help them stitch the clothes together to make really great sleeping sacks. They also engaged a local artist to take some of the clothes and repurpose them into bags that could be sold so that they could generate financial resources for people who were homeless. And then they also recognized that often people who are homeless don't go and apply for services, not because they don't know where to go, but for whatever reason, they thought if they didn't bring a pen, they couldn't fill the forms out. And so they handed out 100 pens, and much to my chagrins, they got 13 people off the street because they applied for the right program to get off the street. So to me, I feel like as educators, we have to create experiences, you know, and if we create those experiences, then we're going to start to get people out of that comfort zone where you don't need to travel to Africa to do good in the community where you live. You just get out in the community where you live and you experience what's really happening. To me, this is another form of empathy. this experience-based empathy. Those students didn't come back from me forcing them to hang out with the folks who are homeless in Maine for weeks and had to do an empathy map. They knew what the problems were, and they had some real solutions. And yes, using Gary's analogy, they realized they couldn't eat the whole elephant at one time. So they took their little bite and said, we can make better sleep sacks. We can get people some pens, and maybe they'll fill out applications and get off the street. And we can get some artists to make some bags that could be sold to contribute some money back to resources that help support these people. And to me, I thought that was brilliant work, because they were able to step back and go, okay, here's how I can do a little bit of social change, which I think is important. Like, most of the issues that we're talking about, when I meet with people that often have a new product idea, they're not trying to change the whole world. They're just saying, oh, here's a gap I think that exists. We need all natural lip balm. So when it comes to social things, I'll often say to people in my consulting practice, you need the lip balm approach. If you think you're going to solve poverty in the world, or you're going to solve global hunger, or you're going to solve global homelessness, it's not possible. I mean, the only way we solve it is if a bunch of smart people do a bunch of small things that make a big difference. I think if we are focused on trying to slay the entire beast, the beast is too big and the battle is going to be too long. And so I think often for students, it's just helping them reframe their thinking to help them recognize, well, there are problems in your own backyard. Here's a way in which you can get out of your comfort zone. One experiment I did one semester, which of course I had some parents write to me because they were like, you did what? I'm like, you know what? If you want to experience homelessness, sleep in your car for a night and see what that's like. And out of a class of 23 people, 14 or 15 of them slept in their car for a night. They're like, that was horrible. Exactly. Okay, now we have a frame of reference. We've disrupted our own thinking about what we assume about these situations. And I think often, one of the things that I love about transformational learning theory is when you get people to just disrupt the way they think about a problem and change their frame of reference, they often get naturally more creative about it. Like, when for that particular semester, when I said, okay, who can tell me what it's probably like to be homeless? No one could, or no one wanted to admit to if they were in the circumstance. But it changed the whole dialogue of the room when the vast majority of students slept in their car for one night. Now, obviously, I had to rethink that one because parents got a little bit upset that I'm like, go to sleep in your car for the night.
They weren't impressed by you.
Yeah.
No.
So, but I mean, to me, these are the things that are, so fascinating to me. I love to get people in the field because I, by my own nature, am a tactile learner. I mean, as a scientist, the vast majority of the way in which I learned chemistry, which was by doing chemical experiments, I got out and I tinkered with things. So that desire to be a tinkerer, I've tried to bring with me when I'm a business educator. And, I think that's, Gary introduced me to this wonderful exercise that I now use in class where when we're forming teams, what typically happens when we form teams in the classroom, people sit next to one another and then they say, all right, the people who are around me in close proximity are going to be on my team, or the people that I've worked with in past semesters will be on my team. So instead, Gary had this idea where he handed out cards and they had an animal written on them. And you found your team by making the sound that the animal made. So all the dogs barked and they formed a team, and the cats meowed. And of course, you always have to pick a few animals that are ambiguous. So I chose the emu, because who the hell knows what sound an emu makes? And so, of course, by the time we settled, the dogs and cows and ducks and cats had all gotten together, and there was a group of people standing confused in the center of the room, and they're like, we must be the emus. Exactly. So, but to me, it's like, that was such a fun way to break the ice, because when we were done, people laughed about it, they started to talk about it, and then I throw them a real challenge. But because they have some camaraderie and there's been some laughing and they've gotten that little cognitive reset, they're, I think, more ready to accept that challenge. So, one thing I would encourage everyone to be doing is, let's push our students. It's really funny. I taught a course at the University of Reykjavik last spring with a colleague from USM, and it was a joint course on creativity and innovation in the global marketplace. And so we brought students from Maine, we had students from Europe come, and there were students from Iceland in this class. And the two professors that we taught with from Reykjavik, they said, well, culturally, our students, they don't engage a lot in class discussion. They don't stay after class and socialize. Here's just what the culture's like. Well, my colleague Heidi and I were like, you know what, we're going to change that while we're here. And the funniest thing, these two professors who I love them both. I've taught with both of them a couple of times. They were like, we don't think you're going to change the culture much. By the end of the trip, they were like, these students have transformed. They're staying after class, they're socializing, they're participating, they're coming prepared. Well, how did we do that? We did a lot of experiential learning exercises. Like when we were trying to teach teamwork, we did this thing out on the green of the campus where students had to cross an imaginary lava river. We engaged in the skill of play. It got them to build teams and to figure out how to be more effective communicators. Almost everything we did was experiential. I hauled Legos across the Atlantic so that we could do Lego serious play. The funniest thing, the students in Iceland, like the first day, they were like, we're going to be playing with toys. They were like looking at me like I had 6 heads. And at the end of 2 weeks, they asked if we would leave the Legos, which we decided to do. They were so engaged with these different models that I'm like, sure, of course we'll leave the Legos. But what you have to commit to do is talk to other students about this process, or better yet, if you're in a class where you have to design thinking, bring the Legos out and use them to do ideation or prototyping or whatever. So, I think a lot of it has to also do with our intention. And, I love getting students out in Maine to see the problems we have in Maine so that we can focus on solving the problems in Maine.
I agree 100% with Richard. Experiential learning and service learning are absolutely critical. To stand up and talk at students, specifically in this topic about how to be creative, that would be just torture for them. It'd be torture for me if I had to do that also. Richard and I sat through, we did a presentation in New Orleans on various experiential learning exercises and entrepreneurial thinking, but we also were able to sit in on another one where the professor was doing flash mobs. And so we're going to implement that in one of our courses, that students are going to create flash mobs. So having the students put their hands on it. Entrepreneurship, be it the standard entrepreneurship or social enterprise, is a contact sport. It's not a spectator sport. So they have to be involved in touching it to really get the true understanding and the true learning. And that's where some of the creativity comes out. I would also, Stefano and John, turn you on to Tina Zelig from Stanford University. She's the most creative person I've ever met in academia. And it's interesting, she teaches some great courses embedding creativity in their engineering program, which I think would be an interesting challenge from dealing with stereotypical engineering students. And she wrote a book, I don't have the exact title, that was a great influence on me, but it's along the line of what I wish I knew when I was 20 years old. So I would seriously take a look at that. I think that would be helpful in understanding different exercises and creativity that you can apply with the RISE program.
If you have not read any of Daniel Levitin's work, Daniel Levitin is a neurochemist by training. He wrote the book, This Is Your Brain on Music, and he was one of the first people to figure out the connection between our neurochemistry and our creativity. He was at McGill originally. He's at Stanford now, I believe. And he's done a lot of work focused on how you improve performance in the professional practices like business and engineering through these classic techniques that normally we only have traditionally used with artists. And so like I do a lot of his stuff in class, and one of the things I find is it's stuff that students continue to do. Like I encourage them to do reflection journals. You know, it's funny, often when I meet with a student who was in class 3 to 4 years ago, I'll be like, what are the things you kept doing? The things that I love, I've stayed focused on customer-centric design. I still use the business model canvas as a way to investigate any idea, and I've maintained a creative practice. And if I have students say those 3 things to me, I think I've done my job. You know, I often am like, oh, I want them to tell me all sorts of things, like they're still keeping a reflection journal, they're still doing this, they're still doing that. But at the end of the day, I'm like, if they really heard the message that everything they do should be rooted in what a customer wants as it relates to business and not what they want, that's a good win. As long as they're using a tool like the business model canvas, it's forcing them to think through the way in which they create, deliver, and capture value. Also important. And I think if they're practicing something that keeps their mind agile and keeps them creative, then that will also serve them well. So at the end of the day, I feel like that's, for me, one of the triumvirates of success, because I've helped change the way they think, but also given them some tools to think differently about how they would go into the market.
To connect with you again, Gary, and I'm sure we'll talk again. Listen, thanks a million. You've been very generous with your time. And I know our students will really appreciate this.
Thank you very much, guys. It was very informative, and always is looking at what other people are doing from an academic perspective, for a more practitioner's perspective is really informative, just to have a sense of what is happening around the globe. So thank you very much for taking the time to having us and asking some question that inform our thinking.
Richard, John, and Stefano, thank you very much for participating in this discussion on design thinking for social enterprise. You've provided outstanding content and valuable knowledge on the topic. It's truly been a privilege speaking with you. Much work has been done in the field of social entrepreneurship, and much is still to be accomplished. The future is bright, and many social issues will be addressed as a result of your work. In conclusion, today's a great day to start a social enterprise and change the world positively. Thank you.